All right, let's dive in. Today, we're all about macOS security, but we're going deep, really deep.
Deeper than your average change your password advice.
Exactly. We're talking hardcore hardening using the CIS Apple macOS 15.0 Sequoia benchmark as our roadmap.
That's right. Think technical configurations, the nitty-gritty settings that build a truly strong security posture.
If you're deploying Macs in an organization or trying to meet those tough compliance standards.
This is your deep dive.
Okay, so picture this. You've got a whole fleet of Macs to secure.
Not just the basic stuff, but really locking them down against some serious threats.
Where do you even start?
That's where the CIS benchmark comes in. It's like having a team of experts giving you a detailed blueprint.
And one thing that really stood out to me was the rigorous process behind this benchmark.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just a random list of suggestions.
It goes through a two-phase review.
First, you have all these subject matter experts huddled together, crafting and testing these recommendations.
Then they open it up to the wider security community for feedback.
That open review process means you're getting some seriously vetted best practices.
It's like a collective wisdom of the security world.
Exactly.
And talking about best practices, the benchmark clearly distinguishes between recommendations that can be automated.
And those that need to be done manually?
Anyone who's ever wrestled with a security framework will appreciate that.
Huge help, especially when you're dealing with a ton of devices.
You can often handle the automated stuff with tools like CIS Cat Pro.
Makes scaling things up so much smoother.
But then there are those manual recommendations.
The ones that need that personal touch.
Can't just script those away.
So yeah, we love automation.
But those manual steps are still critical.
Especially when an audit comes knocking.
Absolutely.
It's a good reminder that security is never set it and forget it.
You need both the automated safeguards and that human element.
To really batten down the hatches.
Okay, let's get into the actual recommendations.
Sounds good.
I want to start with something that's probably top of mind for anyone managing Macs, updates and patching. We all know it's crucial.
Absolutely.
But how does the benchmark approach this?
It goes beyond the usual keep your software updated mantra.
Okay.
It stresses enabling automatic checks and downloads for OS updates.
So not just being notified about updates.
Right. You want those downloads happening in the background.
Ready to go.
Minimizes that window of vulnerability.
Makes sense.
And I think it's pretty cool how macOS handles certain security updates, like those for X-Protect and gatekeepers.
Those are the big guns against known malware, right?
Exactly. And they update silently in the background, no user interaction needed.
Like a silent guardian, always watching, always updating.
Precisely. But here's the thing. While we all love seamless security, sometimes those software update delays can be tempting, you know?
Oh, I know. You're in the middle of something important.
And that update notification pops up. Can this wait?
The benchmark is pretty clear on this one.
That's the verdict. It advises against delaying updates for too long. Keep those delays to a maximum of 1 to 30 days.
Finding that sweet spot between security and keeping users happy.
Because even a short delay can be an open invitation for attackers.
They're out there, constantly scanning for those vulnerable systems.
And an outdated Mac is a prime target.
Speaking of targets, let's imagine a worst-case scenario.
Oh no, what happened?
You've got a laptop packed with sensitive company data, and it gets left behind, say, in a taxi.
Oof. That's every IT admin's nightmare.
Not just the lost device, but that potential data breach.
That's where File Vault comes in.
File Vault, our trusty data protector.
It encrypts your entire hard drive, making that data unreadable without the key.
So even if someone swipes the laptop,
the data is still safe.
The benchmark strongly recommends enabling File Vault.
Especially for laptops or any device that ventures out into the world.
And there's a little detail here that I think often gets overlooked.
What's that?
The standby delay setting.
Oh, right, standby delay. Remind me what that does again. It controls how long your Mac sleeps before going into hibernation mode.
Hibernation?
Which writes those encryption keys to disk.
Okay.
So for laptops, setting this to 15 minutes or less
means those keys aren't hanging around in memory for long.
Exactly. It's like an extra layer of protection for those keys themselves.
Shortening that delay makes things even tougher for an attacker.
Trying to pry into that data and this whole idea of encrypting data when it's just sitting there on the hard drive.
Yeah.
That's data at rest encryption, a fundamental security principle that the benchmark really emphasizes.
Okay, let's shift gears to another critical area.
Sure.
Account security and access control.
The gatekeepers of our systems.
This is where we get into user accounts, permissions, all those things that can make or break your security.
And the benchmark, right off the bat, calls out the need to scrutinize all those user accounts.
Do you really need each and every one?
Are there any legacy accounts that can be, retired?
Because every account, especially one with admin privileges,
Is a potential entry point for an attacker.
and let's not forget about the often overlooked guest account.
Oh, the benchmark is crystal clear on this one. Disable the guest account.
It's like a welcome mat for unauthorized access.
And don't just disable it, go the extra mile and remove the guest home folder entirely.
Now that's attention to detail.
And even if you disable the guest account, that folder can reappear if you re-enable it later.
Wow, they really thought of everything.
That's the beauty of this benchmark.
And while we're on the topic of accounts,
Let's not forget about those passwords.
yes, the cornerstone of account security.
Strong passwords are non-negotiable.
But the benchmark doesn't stop there.
It dives deep into password policies, recommending setting a global policy for minimum password length using the POPL policy command.
Okay, policy.
And requiring a mix of uppercase, lowercase.
At least one digit.
So it's not just about length, it's about complexity, too.
Now, I know some organizations are really into enforcing special characters in passwords.
Interestingly, the benchmark doesn't specifically mandate special characters.
Really?
It leaves that decision up to the organization's own security policy.
So it acknowledges that there's some debate about the effectiveness of special characters.
Some argue they actually lead to weaker passwords overall.
Because people try to remember those complex combinations and end up writing them down.
Exactly, defeats the whole purpose.
But the benchmark gives you the tools to enforce them if you choose to.
Flexibility is key.
So it's not just about password complexity.
Remember, we're dealing with a whole fleet of Macs here, potentially with multiple admins.
Right.
The benchmark gets into securing those powerful sudo commands as well.
Sudo, those temporary admin privileges.
Exactly, and if those credentials are compromised, even for a short time,
It could be a disaster.
the benchmark strongly recommends setting the sudo timeout to 0.
So as soon as someone's done using sudo,
Those elevated privileges disappear.
no lingering access. I like it.
And it also mentions enabling logging for sudo commands.
So you have a record of who did what and when.
Essential for accountability and incident response.
It's all about having that visibility into your systems.
You can't just set up these controls and hope for the best.
You need that audit trail, that ability to retrace steps if something goes wrong.
You got it.
And speaking of auditing, that's where things get really interesting.
Oh yeah, security auditing takes monitoring to a whole new level.
We'll have to dive into that fascinating world in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds like a plan. Welcome back. We're picking up where we left off in our exploration of the CIS MacOS Benchmark.
Last time, we covered some of those foundational elements.
Updates, encryption, account security, that kind of thing.
And now, we're going to delve into some more specialized areas.
The stuff that's really relevant when you're managing a whole bunch of Macs.
Okay, I'm ready for the next level.
All right, let's dive in.
There's one section that really caught my eye.
Oh yeah, which one?
System Integrity Protection, or SIP.
Ah, SIP, the guardian of your system files.
Sounds important, but what does it actually do?
Introduced back in OS X El Capitan, it locks down those critical system locations, preventing even admins from making unauthorized changes.
So even if an attacker manages to get admin privileges,
They still can't just waltz in and mess with those sensitive files.
SIP puts up a serious roadblock.
Exactly, and the benchmark is crystal clear on this. SIP enabled, always.
Disabling it is like leaving the door wide open.
Not a good look.
Makes sense. Now, there was another term that popped up.
What's that?
Signed System Volume, or SSV.
Ah, SSV, that takes system protection to a whole new level.
Is it related to SIP?
You could say that SSV cryptographically seals those core system files, guaranteeing their integrity.
So any unauthorized modification.
Kicks off alarm bells.
It was introduced in Big Sur, right?
Yep, Big Sur really upped the security game.
So even if some sneaky attacker managed to bypass SIP,
SSV is there as a backup, making sure the system hasn't been tampered with.
it's like a double lock on those crucial files.
Exactly, and the benchmark has a strong warning about this.
What's that?
If SSV is disabled, assume compromise.
Oh, that's serious.
Back up your critical data and do a clean OS reinstall, no questions asked.
It shows how much Apple prioritizes system integrity in their newer operating systems.
No doubt about it.
I also noticed a lot of recommendations around file and directory permissions.
Right. Permissions, the unsung heroes of security.
Why so much emphasis on these granular settings?
It's all about shrinking that attack surface, you see.
Okay.
Ensuring the right permissions on system folders and applications reduces the risk of unauthorized access or modification.
So it's like putting up fences around those sensitive areas.
Exactly. The benchmark provides a whole checklist to review.
Including those hidden directories buried deep within the system.
You got to check those too.
It even mentions looking out for world writable permissions within those directories.
Now that's a big red flag.
Why is that so bad?
World writable files within system folders, that needs immediate investigation.
Could be a sign of trouble.
Could be a misconfigured application.
Or something far worse.
Exactly. You don't want to take any chances.
Speaking of things we don't want to take chances with,
What's that?
passwords.
Passwords, passwords, passwords.
The benchmark really dives deep into password policies.
Beyond just minimum length.
It recommends setting a global policy for password complexity using the PW policy command.
So that means requiring a mix of uppercase, lowercase.
And at least one digit.
To make those passwords harder to crack.
Now, I know some organizations are big on enforcing special characters in passwords.
You know, exclamation points, dollar signs, those kinds of things.
Right, but interestingly, the benchmark doesn't mandate special characters.
It leaves that up to each organization's security policy.
So it recognizes that there's some debate about whether special characters actually make passwords stronger.
Some argue they just make them more annoying for users.
Leading to those bad habits like writing passwords down.
Exactly.
But the benchmark gives you the option to enforce them, if that's your policy.
Flexibility is important.
Okay, so we've got password complexity covered.
What else?
What about those sudo commands?
Ah, sudo, the double-edged sword.
Those temporary admin privileges can be risky.
Especially if they're misused.
The benchmark has some specific recommendations for securing sudo.
Especially for organizations with lots of admins running around.
What do they suggest?
Setting the sudo timeout to 0.
So as soon as someone's done using sudo,
Their elevated privileges are gone.
no more lingering access.
Minimizing that window of opportunity.
And I see they also mention logging those sudo commands.
Right, so you have a record of who did what and when.
Essential for keeping track of those powerful actions.
Absolutely. It's all about that visibility, knowing what's happening on your systems.
You can't just set up security controls and cross your fingers. You need that audit trail, that ability to go back and see what happened.
To respond effectively if something goes wrong.
Exactly. And speaking of auditing,
That's where things get really interesting.
security auditing, it's like having a detective on your system, constantly gathering clues.
The benchmark provides some really detailed guidance on how to configure macOS's built-in auditing features.
So we're talking about enabling audited
The auditing daemon.
and then configuring it to track specific events.
Things like login attempts, file modifications, any attempts to escalate privileges.
It's like having a security camera recording all those critical actions.
And the benchmark recommends specific flags to track user-attributable events.
So you know exactly who did what.
Exactly. No more guessing games.
But it's not enough to just record those events.
Right. You need to make sure those logs are properly managed.
The benchmark goes into detail about log retention.
Recommending keeping those audit records for at least 60 days or 5 GB.
So you have enough historical data to investigate incidents.
And those audit records, they contain sensitive information.
You don't want just anyone peeking at those.
The benchmark stresses that only authorized personnel should be able to access and analyze those logs.
To prevent tampering and keep that sensitive information safe. We've covered a lot of ground here, from system integrity to passwords to sudo to security auditing.
It's clear that this benchmark leaves no stone unturned.
It's incredibly thorough, providing both specific recommendations and the reasoning behind them.
But we're not done yet. There's still more to explore.
You're right, we still need to dive into network configurations and application-specific hardening.
Those areas can have a huge impact on your overall security posture, especially when you're managing a fleet of Macs.
Stay tuned, we'll be back to explore those often overlooked but critical aspects of macOS security. All right, welcome back to our macOS security deep dive, using the CIS benchmark as our guide.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have, from those core OS settings.
To passwords, sudo, even security auditing.
Now we're turning our attention to a couple of areas that often fly under the radar.
But are super important, especially when you're managing a whole fleet of Macs.
You're talking about network configurations.
And application-specific hardening.
It's easy to get fixated on securing the OS itself.
And forget about those Macs connecting to networks.
And all those applications they're running.
Each with their own potential security quirks.
And the benchmark, thankfully, doesn't disappoint.
It's got some really insightful recommendations in these areas.
Helping us build that multi-layered defense.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's get into it.
Sounds good.
One section that caught my attention was about Bonjour advertising services.
Bonjour, our friendly network discovery tool.
Right. Helps devices find each other on the local network.
But why would the benchmark recommend disabling it?
That's what I was wondering.
Well, convenience often comes with a security trade-off.
I see.
Bonjour, while helpful, broadcasts your Mac's presence
To anyone within network range.
potentially attracting unwanted attention.
So by disabling Bonjour advertising,
You're essentially making those Macs less visible,
reducing the attack surface.
like turning off that open for business sign.
I get it, but wouldn't this break certain applications that rely on Bonjour?
It could, so it's a decision that requires careful thought.
Weighing those risks and benefits.
Exactly.
Another recommendation that surprised me.
What's that?
Disabling the built-in HTTP server.
You mean Apache?
Yeah, I honestly didn't even realize macOS still had Apache running in the background.
It's a legacy feature. Most users probably don't even know it's there.
But from a security standpoint,
It's best to shut it down.
is it really that risky to have a basic web server running on a Mac?
It's all about minimizing unnecessary vulnerabilities.
Okay.
And remember, we're talking about managing a fleet of devices here.
Right, it's not just 1 or 2 Macs.
It's much safer to handle web serving through dedicated hardened servers.
Not on individual user endpoints.
Keep those Macs lean and mean, focused on their primary tasks.
Makes sense. And while we're on the topic of server-related components,
What else did you see?
the benchmark also mentions disabling the NFS file server service.
NFS, another one of those services that's probably best left to dedicated servers.
So this follows the same logic as disabling Apache.
Absolutely. Minimizing the attack surface, adhering to the principle of least privilege.
User endpoints, especially those that are mobile.
Shouldn't be running services that could be exploited.
So shutting down NFS reduces the risk of unauthorized file access,
Or data leakage.
like locking down those extra doors that you don't really need open anyway,
Precisely, and this principle applies not just to network services.
but to applications as well.
We've talked about Safari.
Right, but the benchmark goes a step further,
It digs into securing other built-in apps, too.
like Terminal.
Terminal, the command line powerhouse.
That can make you feel like you're in a hacker movie.
Powerful as it is, it can also be a security risk if it's not properly configured.
So what does the benchmark recommend?
One key recommendation is enabling secure keyboard entry.
Secure keyboard entry, what does that do?
It prevents keyloggers and other malicious software from capturing your keystrokes.
When you're typing in Terminal.
Exactly, especially when you're entering sensitive commands or passwords.
Or accessing remote servers,
It adds an extra layer of protection for those sensitive actions.
like a virtual shield for your keyboard.
You got it.
It's these little details that can really make a big difference in your overall security.
It's what I love about this benchmark.
It goes beyond the high-level stuff.
It gets into the specifics, the granular settings that can really harden a macOS device.
And it's not just a list of rules,
It explains the reasoning behind each recommendation.
helping you understand the why,
It's about empowering you to make informed decisions,
based on your specific needs and risk tolerance.
not just blindly following a checklist.
This has been a true deep dive, and I feel like we've only scratched the surface of this benchmark.
There's so much more to explore in the full document.
And for anyone out there tasked with securing Macs,
I highly recommend taking the time to really dig into this benchmark.
it's packed with valuable information that can help you build a solid security strategy.
It's like having a team of macOS security gurus guiding you every step of the way.
So to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into macOS security.
We hope you found it informative and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Remember, security is an ongoing journey, so stay curious
Stay informed.
and stay secure.